Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Lindy Jung and this is the third time you're seeing this turtleneck. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about comp titles or comparative titles, which are a crucial tool for any author looking into traditional publishing and are a little bit opaque, a little bit difficult to parse in my experience. Honestly, I didn't even know what a comparative title was by the time I started querying back in 2017 or 18, but it is an extremely critical tool in traditional publishing at pretty much every level, from pitches on Twitter to submission. So yeah, I just wanted to go over the basics today, provide you guys with a couple of examples, and send you on your way. Real quick video, hopefully it is useful to some of y'all out there. Honestly, it was so hard looking for comp title resources when I started out, so, you know, if I can contribute somehow, this is how I'm gonna do it. So part one, what is a comp title? It's basically a book, or a film, or a show, any piece of media, but primarily a book that shares some sort of key similarity with your piece of work. This allows agents, editors, and even potential readers to sort of gain an understanding of your story based off of this title. The typical format is something like Book 1 meets Book 2, or Book 1 x Book 2. I'm mostly going to talk about literary comparisons because that is the generally preferred comp title choice when it comes to traditional publishing. And while it seems pretty straightforward on the surface, there are a lot of like little secret rules, right? For example, your comp title can't be something that's insanely popular like Percy Jackson. It usually has to have been published in the last 5 to 10 years. It has to be in the same genre and age category most of the time. And it has to be relevant, like not too relevant, like I said, not insanely popular, but relevant enough that people who read can like understand what you're trying to say. These aren't necessarily hard and fast rules, but you do have to consider that comp titles are a way to show that you're market savvy and understand your genre, as well as like give information about your book. It's sort of doing a lot of things at once. Part two is finding comp titles. When I pitched the book that got me signed with my first agent, I straight up used X-Men as a comp title. Like in my pitches, straight up just X-Men. Because I was successful in this pitch competition, this kind of does go to show that concepts, films, those are okay. The only thing is that now that I know a little bit more, things like X-Men or Princess Mononoke, that's always gonna be the secondary title, like the second part of the thing. Unless it's something that is really popping off at the moment, like, you know, trends come and go, but if a movie is gaining a particular amount of attention, especially in the same social media circles that you're going to be using this comp title in, or if you saw that an editor or an agent on their manuscript wish list asked for, like, I don't know, a book that could comp, what's a movie? I don't know any movies. Everything Everywhere All at Once. That took so long. Obviously, you would want to take that opportunity to use that as one of your comps if it fits, if it actually is an honest comp. But generally speaking, you want at least one book, one comp title that fits into the categories of it's a book, it's relatively recent, it fits your age category and genre, and it's actually true to your story, to your book. Finding comp titles that fit this can be really difficult, especially if you're not really like someone who writes to trends. If your book is a little bit different, a little bit wacky, a little zany, a little unique, this was something I really struggled with. Of course, since that book was signed, I have since found many comp titles that have been published, which is irritating, but you know, it is the way of the world. One of the best ways to go about this is to find maybe a more popular book that fits as a comp title and go through lists on Goodreads that sort of, you know, people like organize things by lists. You can also just look up straight up your genre and age category and look up 2022, 2021 releases and scroll through those. Within 3 to 5 years is a general good rule, but the more recent, the better. Another good way to stay on top of this is honestly to just keep reading your genre, like just kind of check the New York Times bestseller list every couple weeks, see what's selling, see what's trending. Just read. Part 3 is using comp titles effectively. In my opinion, the best way to use comp titles is to be really specific when you're mentioning them. So instead of saying like X meets X, like Title 1 meets Title 2, you can say something more specific like the cutthroat competition of the Hunger Games meets the culinary world of Great British Bake Off. This paints a more specific picture in the intended target audience's mind. It creates an instant sense of intrigue, like how can those two things combine? You know, like how does that work? And you can comp for anything that works. It also prevents that feeling of false advertising. Hopefully you're just doing this correctly. So instead of someone picking up a book that comps the Hunger Games and being like, well, I expect this to be about a deadly competition with a love triangle, maybe they pick it up and your pitch said, like, you know, it comps the love triangle in the Hunger Games, so they're not expecting the cutthroat competition, they're expecting the love triangle. And you can basically comp for anything that works, like tone, voice, writing style, characters, specific dynamics, relationships, tropes, etc. A lot of pitches nowadays are something like X meets the slow burn enemies to lovers romance of X. Like, it gets very nitty-gritty with the details, and honestly I love that trend. I think it is really helpful when it comes to finding things that you actually want to read. I've recently noticed that comp titles have sort of taken a turn towards being entirely vibes-based, which I also kind of love. It's a little bit iconic to see a pitch that's like, this book will make you feel the way like Taylor Swift's Folklore, is that what it's called? I'm sorry, don't listen to her, but the way that Taylor Swift album did. But you gotta be careful, because then people will read this and then expect to be made to feel the way that Folklore album made them feel, so you don't want to like falsely advertise. You have to be pretty confident to do that. Part 4 is just things to be careful of. Comp titles that are too vague are an issue for sure. I really just hate seeing Harry Potter as a comp title. I mean, I have beef with Harry Potter in general because turf, but when I see that comped, it gets me confused. What aspect of Harry Potter are you comping? Because that's a really long series with a lot going on. So is it like the magic school, the evil wizard, the fat phobia? Comp titles that say too much or are too specific to matter are also an issue. I think people sometimes like pick the wrong things to emphasize in their book when it comes to comp titles. So if your book is featuring a shithead prince, but he's not like a main character, then you don't really want to do a comp that says like, you know, you don't want to use up one of your precious comp titles on highlighting that trope and saying Howl's Moving Castle. Comp titles that misrepresent the work or are straight up lies. This one's interesting because I think this is more of like a marketing side of things. I obviously haven't read every manuscript that has come across my dash with specific pitches and comp titles, etc., so I can't verify any of this, but I have noticed that there's like a good amount of false advertising going on in like recent young adult fantasy releases, because the comp titles that the marketing team uses are straight up not correct. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this. I don't want to like name any examples because I just feel like that's kind of messed up, but it's definitely something I've noticed because people are leaning more heavily now on comps like The Hunger Games for some reason, or Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then I'll read the book and it's nothing like that. Yeah, so I guess just don't lie is my advice here. I think another thing to be wary of is comp titles that are just straight up like cliche and overdone. Using The Hunger Games to comp every dystopian book ever, like they all sort of blur together at a certain point, so that's not going to get me interested in your dystopian book. If you were comping something completely unexpected, like shit, like saying that this is a dystopian young adult novel that draws from what are books? Now, if you were to comp your dystopian YA novel to something like The Great Gatsby, I would probably be interested then, because that's pretty different. But yeah, just generally speaking, Lord of the Rings for every fantasy with an elf in it. Just chill, like it's not, I don't know, Game of Thrones for every political, grimdark fantasy. Just relax. Find something different. Do something different, please. You've also got to be careful of comp titles that are obscure, comp titles that are out of print, comp titles no one's heard of, because the point is that you're trying to invoke a sense of familiarity in the person who is scanning through your pitch and your comp titles. You don't want to, as much as accurate as it may be, and that's the frustrating part, I found some comp titles before for my work that have been amazing, but no one has ever heard of them, or they're slightly like past their best by date, you know? It's annoying, but you just kind of have to keep pushing and go for the more familiar territory, because otherwise you're sort of defeating the purpose of comp titles. Comp titles that flopped or aren't really liked. This kind of sucks because, of course, it's very subjective and you might love the thing that you want to comp to, but you don't want to comp to anything that flopped. Like, you don't want anything that has a bad reputation, because that's what is going to come up in people's mind when they see that comparison. I don't know. I feel like you know, there's some leeway here. Some books sell really well but don't have the best reputation, and vice versa. But yeah, you don't really want to comp to, like, I don't know, like the Sonic movie. It just is not a good idea. And then another thing to avoid is comp titles that are outside of your genre or age category or both. Again, there's some leeway here. There's some room to play around, especially if you're able to get specific with it. But generally speaking, you don't really want to deviate from that, because it just shows that you maybe don't read within your selected genre or age category. And that's, I think, I've heard that kind of is a red flag. I don't know how true that is. But in any case, generally speaking, if your book is like a middle grade science fantasy, then you probably don't want to be comping to adult literary fiction. I don't even know what the comparison would be there, but just in case. Part 5 is gonna be examples, and I am scared. I do tend to learn best when I see examples of things, so I just wanted to show you guys some actual real-life comps I've used for some of my work that has been on submission and queried and etc. So, oh my god, this is like revealing a lot about myself. But yeah, here are a couple of my comp titles. So the first one here is a contemporary young adult fantasy that I had on submission. I don't know, I've talked about this one. It's my road trip book. And this one is the voice and adventure of the epic crush of Jeannie Lo meets the exploration of teen grief of the astonishing color of after. So those are two, at the time, or still sort of now, pretty recent young adult fantasy, contemporary fantasy specifically, comps that came out. I actually don't think I used the astonishing color of after in my actual submission package. I think we just used Jeannie Lo, so that's, you know, one thing to keep in mind is if I thought of that a little earlier, that could have worked really well, but I think we went with something different, and I don't remember what it was, but I'm pretty sure I hadn't read it, so I don't know, it was like my agent's call. My young adult fantasy that is currently on submission is Laini Taylor meets Korean mythology, and I think specifically we said like the writing style or voice of Laini Taylor because it's a very lyrical sort of, you know, I tried to make it lyrical, tried to have that flowy, like poetic sort of prose throughout. And it's very much drenched in mythology and this like idea of storytelling because it literally opens with a myth. So I feel like those are very represented in Laini Taylor's work, and she's also definitely like my favorite young adult author who is writing today, so that was really exciting to get to comp her work. And the second part, as you can see, is not a book. This is like a different one, right? Because it's not specific titles, but because there is very much like this incredibly specific aspect of Korean mythology very prevalent in the book, it was an apt one to use, I figure. My adult dark academia fantasy, which I have not finished, and I don't know if I will for a while, but it is the twisted dark academia setting of A Deadly Education meets the eerie magic of Siren Queen, which those are two adult books. The first one is leaning a little bit toward crossover, but they're fantasy books. They both have a contemporary element, and they're both specific. They're not insanely popular. People definitely know A Deadly Education. I hope people know Siren Queen because that one is excellent. They're able to invoke specific like tone and genre, and also just sort of speak to the weirdness of the magic. And then the last one is the sapphic YA fantasy that I'm currently vlogging about, and this one is I've written Six Crimson Cranes meets Studio Ghibli's Howl's Moving Castle. I feel like this one is a little bit of a false representation of this book because while it does have that sort of like fairy tale and mythological vibe of Six Crimson Cranes, it does not have an Asian inspired setting. It's very much like Western influenced. So I might change that, but that's what I have right now. And alright, so that wraps up this video. Thank you so much for watching, as per usual. I hope this was informative. You can let me know what you think about comp titles below, what you've struggled with when it comes to finding them, or if you have any good ones for your work. I mean, I'm curious to see them. So yeah, I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.